You guys are seeing it? Okay, perfect. So down on the left-hand bar, the deeper blue color, there should be towards the bottom something called Studio. I'm going to click on that. Of course, this is showing you my view. Let me see if it will show me. It doesn't allow me to switch to the student view, but this is just showing you mine. So when you get there, you'll probably, if you haven't created any videos, you won't see anything like you see on mine. So you go up to the right-hand corner to create and click that. And when you click the first studio capture option, it's showing you my video right now. And if I drop down the screen, you can see where you can start recording. You can stop your recording. And then once you stop, you'll have an option to upload that video. So I'm going to go back. If I go back to the course, and I'm going to actually switch it to the view as a student, so I'm seeing more of what you would see. If I go down to week 6, where this is due, to the CVA Lab Practical Interventions video, and I click on that, it'll allow you to start assignment. And this is here where you can add your file. And it obviously has a tab, a whole separate tab for Studio, which will allow you to bring in whatever videos you have there. Okay, so it's really user-friendly. I believe you can create it from here in the assignment. However, if you want to, you know, maybe record it more than once, you're not sure how it's going to go, you may record it in 2 parts. You have the option of uploading it after the fact. You don't have to do it in the assignment. Okay, so I'm going to leave that student view. But it should be pretty user-friendly. There is a video that tells you how to create a video in Studio. So if you need a refresher, that's available in that assignment block. Okay. Any questions on any of that? Okay. You guys are easy to please this week. So this week we're going to go over transfers, wheelchairs, and gait. And then you will have, like I said last week, you'll have all of your tools in your toolbox. There's nothing new as far as those things to learn. Then we're going to add all the diagnosis stuff on top. So next week, I'm going to go back to viewing my tab here. So for week 4, this week, we're going to go over chapter 8, 9, and 11, talk about pathological gait. But as far as next week is concerned, I don't have everything published for you yet, but there's going to be some notes that will just kind of reinforce what you're learning on the lecture side and coordinating it with the lab for both CVA and TBI. I'll have a clinical manifestation chart of, excuse me, stroke, depending upon the region of the brain that's damaged. And then there'll be some asynchronous activities. I have videos inserted for a lot of this. There's instructions. So I'll just show it to you here real quick. Sorry for my throat this morning or this afternoon. You guys will work on CVA rolling. It's got bullet points to tell you what to do, so you can walk through those with each other. Bridging activities that do have videos, different levels of assist. Scooting, again, with different levels of assist, transfers. So it should be something that you guys can, for the most part, walk through without a lot of, you know, hand-holding or a lot of instructional on one-on-one. Then you will also have some practice scenarios that you'll be able to work through. And I don't care if you're working on them with each other. I just hope that each of you can come up with some ideas, that you're not just depending upon 1 or 2 people in the group to answer as to what you're going to do as far as addressing a goal. And it'll be a scenario like this 50-year-old male, status post left CVA. And then you'll have 4 goals that you need to try to figure out based upon what you have so far. What do we do to try to address those? So that's what you guys will work on in the AM with somebody just kind of checking in on you. And then in the afternoon, we'll actually do a meeting where I can, we can walk through some of those ideas that you had and tweak those and see if you guys are on track, if you're way off track, we can kind of get that figured out. So I just want to kind of give you a rough idea of what week 5 is going to look like. There'll be some more asynchronous stuff, but there should be everything there for you guys to be able to do that. Okay. Any questions with that before we come back to week 4?
I have a question about the TBI assignment. When do we get that, and when is that due?
The TBI assignment is assigned later. It will be week 5, at the end of week 5, and it's due in week 7.
Okay.
So you guys have a little bit of time there.
Okay.
Are things starting to come together in your thought process, or are you still feeling that deer in the headlight moment?
I'll let you know after today.
Say that again?
I'll let you know after today.
Okay, fair enough. Okay. All right, so if you guys are willing, today I think I'm going to have you guys jot down a few notes that will help guide your thought process. So however you like to do that, if you like to do that on your computer or if you want to have paper and pencil, whatever works for you. But I'm going to give you a few things that will guide not only your thought process, but what you're going to do during lab time tomorrow. That'll help guide that process. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go back and share my screen here on, actually, you know what? I don't think you guys actually need the notes, but I'll bring them up anyway. This isn't the notes technically, this is just the textbook. I don't know if you guys have been making good use of the textbook as far as reinforcing what we've gone over. But let's just have some conversation. So you guys have done basic transfers, correct? Yes? Okay. All right. So what are the parts of a transfer? From first step to last step, if we were going to do, let's say, a straightforward sit to stand transfer, what pieces and parts, if we do that whole task analysis, what are the pieces and parts?
Gate belt.
Okay, for safety, absolutely.
Their cognitive status.
Okay, yes, these are all things to consider, but as far as the actual transfer itself, once we've got safety and we've got all the considerations, and you guys are absolutely correct, you have to think of those things ahead of time. You're 100% correct. But once you actually go to do the transfer, what's the first physical step?
Scoot forward.
Scoot forward. We have a scoot. Then what do we have?
Stand up.
Okay, if I were to ask you guys to scoot forward in your chair right before you sit to stand, what would be the next step? What would you do automatically and you were not even thinking about it?
Putting your hands down to lift yourself up.
You have hands ready for push off. And what about your feet?
Shoulder width apart.
Okay, and what else about the feet?
Knees
Where are they?
I didn't know we were going fully.
So let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. If you sat completely back in your chair, totally relaxed, feet just chilling, can you stand up?
Yeah,
okay, but you changed some things to get there. So if you stayed back here and your feet stayed in the same place, would you be able to get up?
You scoot your feet back? Wait, that's putting our trunk forward?
Okay, so we got two pieces there. So yes, you guys mentioned that you had to scoot forward. You mentioned that you would have the hands placed ready to go. But as far as the feet are concerned, you had to pull the feet back underneath you. If you sat back relaxed and the feet are out front, you can't, from this position, without coming forward and without bringing the feet underneath you, you can't stand, right? And you'll see this when you guys get to Parkinson's disease patients. you're going to find that they don't tend to come forward, and they keep the feet back and they posteriorly lean. So they're really hard to get out of a chair unless you accomplish those things. See? So you have the scoot. You have to get the feet underneath, have the hands placed ready, and then, yes, that lean forward, right? All those things have to take place before you can push to stand. And what is required for you to push to stand? What do they have to have a sufficient amount of?
Balance.
Momentum.
Strength.
Strength. Yes, lower extremity strength. Okay. So keep that in mind when you guys are working on interventions. If you broke down that sit to stand transfer, whatever piece of that puzzle is missing or not working well, you can work on that part in a block practice. You do the one thing over and over and over again to gain whatever it is you're trying to gain. If it's strength, if it's coordination, if it's learning how to do the movement. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Once you get to standing, what else do we need to consider?
Isn't it just sit to stand?
Yes, but the end part of that is standing. So once they get to standing,
Balance.
posture, absolutely. Making sure they are equally weight bearing, they're not shifted to one side, right? And that we don't have any knee buckling. Once you get them to standing, you want them to maintain standing. You don't want anything to go wrong and for them to fall, okay? So those are all pieces and parts that you may consider. Plus, depending upon the diagnosis and the condition of the patient, you may have a gait device to consider. So you guys probably did some of that with basic transfers of where does the device get placed when they sit to stand? Then what side does it need to be on if it's only on one side or another, right? So those are all things that you have to add in that may not necessarily be a neuro treatment in and of itself, but you have to incorporate the device in what you're doing, okay? What kinds of transfers can you perform with your patient? What's your basic one?
Sit to stand.
Okay, so we have a couple different ways. Okay, so we have something called a squat pivot, right? What's a squat pivot?
Where you squat and you pivot. So kind of like.
Yes. Who does a squat pivot?
We do.
This is a patient who's high level or low level? What are their assistance needs?
Would it be low level?
So if you have a patient who's really deconditioned and really weak, are you going to do a stand pivot or a squat pivot?
Squat pivot.
Why?
Because you gotta be stronger since they're weaker.
It widens your base of support.
Okay, it widens your base of support, and you're looking to get them safely from point A to point B, and all you need is for their backside to lift up enough that you can pivot them to this new surface, correct? So as they get stronger, they're going to do more of a stand pivot transfer, and that could be with or without device. Okay, let's say you have somebody who, whether temporary or permanent, cannot use their lower extremities to do much to help them. What kind of transfer do you use? Slide board. Right, good. Okay. So those are your main transfer types. Now there's something else to think about when it comes to transfers as far as verbiage. You're going to have a transfer that you're going to teach, whether it's other healthcare professionals or a family caregiver, how to transfer the patient in the most safe fashion possible. So let's assume your patient has a strong side and a weak side. Which direction do you think you're going to transfer to make them the safest way possible?
Strong side.
To the strong side. Good. When you do something called a therapeutic transfer, this is you and the patient, you're going to start teaching them how to go to the weak side so that they learn how to utilize that and they have the capability of going to either direction. So just know that if we talk about a therapeutic transfer, That's not something you're going to teach the family to do. You want them to take whatever's the most assured, safe route with the patient, which would be to the strong side. Okay. All right. So what kind of things can we work on in order to improve transfers? Think,
Strength,
say that louder.
lower extremity strength.
Perfect. Lower extremity strength. And specifically, what group? Is it flexors or extensors that we need to be super strong?
Sensors.
Extensors. Good. Think posturally. What kind of control do we need in order to do a transfer?
Trunk.
What of the trunk as far as control and posture?
Core. Abdominals.
Okay, you guys are right there. So we need the ability to hold the posture statically, right? The hold, don't let me move you. But we also need them to have dynamic control, because as you just demonstrated, you guys leaned forward and then did this whole transition up to standing. They need to be able to control that trunk during that whole process. So that's dynamic. So, dynamic reversals, combination of isotonics, all those sorts of things, we can work on the trunk in the sitting posture and even standing posture to get the patient ready. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. What else do we need to be strong for the transfer?
Glutes.
Glutes. Okay, so everything lower extremity extension. What about the upper extremity?
Your arms to push yourself up.
Okay, so again, do we need flexors or extensors to be strong?
Extensors.
Extensors. And we need scapular stabilizers to help us to do the depression too, right? What about, what else? Okay, so I'm going to pose the question so I stop just answering for you. So we did all the pieces and parts of the transfer. So what else? We've talked about the upper extremity push off, the lower extremity extension. We've talked about the trunk posture and stabilization and control. What else can we work on to facilitate transferability?
Head control.
What was that?
Head control.
Okay, we do, but that would be very primitive. That would be kind of way early on. If they were lacking that, we wouldn't even be in a sitting posture yet if they didn't have head control. Because remember, everything has to go from head to foot. So we have prone, we have your bed mobility stuff where you're in a more of a sidelining posture, bridging, then up to sitting after even you get to quadruped first. So yes, but that's a little too far back in the timeline. So if they're ready to really work on that sit to stand transfer, what else? You guys already did it. What else needs to occur? How do you work on a scoot? What does the patient have to do in order to scoot?
Oh, hike their hip hiking.
Okay, so they have to weight transfer to one side to be able to unweight and scoot the one hip forward, right? So you could work on weight shifting, right? And that would be medial lateral to help the scoot. But what do they need for the actual sit to stand? What kind of weight transfer needs to happen?
Front to back.
Yeah, they need to be able to lean forward to get ready for the push off. So again, you can work on weight transfer, right? What about the timing of all this? What if you have somebody who's just really slow? And again, I'm kind of delving into another diagnosis, but once we get to Parkinson's, this patient, he needs a lot of time, and they may very well, you can tell I'm coming forward, but I'm taking forever to get there, right? Okay. It may be because of something like that. It may be in order to get the patient stronger even. So how about a sit to stand, the full activity that's done to time? What if by the time you count to 5, they need to be to standing, or from standing to sitting, you count to 5 and they need to get back down to sitting? It could just be the forward motion here. It could be, I want you to come forward. 1, 2, 3. And then I'm doing it again. 1, 2, 3. Okay. So you can add a timing element. You could add a visual element here, but all those are things that help facilitate getting the transfer going. And if I'm hoping some of these things are ringing bells as far as what you've done to this point. If your patient, let me ask you this, if your patient is getting ready to do the anterior weight shift in prep for standing, what's happening at the pelvis?
Doing an anterior tilt.
It's doing an anterior tilt. How do you facilitate an anterior pelvic tilt?
Holding their ASISs.
Yeah, manual cue, right? Right? Come forward. Okay. I'm gonna stop sharing that screen for the text because I'm not scrolling through it for you. So yeah, just manual cues, come forward, tip forward. Okay. You could do it as a dynamic reversal and resist them coming forward. You could do a combination of isotonics, come forward, hold. Now, don't let me push you back too quickly. You could do all of those right there. All those interventions that you did in individual thought processes in a giant list. Now we're taking and we're putting them together, and in a few minutes we're going to go from one thing to the next thing to the next thing. Okay, so hopefully that's starting to click. If we were to do any one of those parts and do a blocked practice intervention, how can we challenge each one of those activity? So for example, I just mentioned we go from manual cues, then we could do it as a dynamic reversal and add resistance. So now the resistance adds challenge to their anterior tilt to the pelvis and then their forward weight shift. Okay. And again, that's working at the pelvis. We could work on the trunk itself and have the shoulder and the ASIS, and resist them coming forward that way and giving them more of a challenge. What else could make the transfer harder while we're training besides resistance? Sorry. Say that again.
I said resistance before you said other than resistance.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
You could put them on a foam pad.
Perfect. So you're altering their seated surface, going from firm, obviously, then to something soft and squishy. Good. Along those lines, besides the integrity of the surface, what else could you adjust as far as the surface goes?
The height.
The height? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Yes, you're correct. So you go from a higher sitting surface where it's easier to sit to stand, and you'd start lowering it. So now if you lower it and you have a softer surface, like, maybe your grandma's old couch that everybody has a hard time getting up out of, you think about that. That's what Granny, who's maybe had a stroke, has to get up out of in her living room. So you would have to work down to a lower level and to a softer surface so that she's able to transfer. Good. Can you do anything with the upper extremities to provide challenge? It was in some of your interventions.
Cross the arm.
What was that?
Cross the arm.
Oh, this? Absolutely. You could even do the clasped hands out in front. So it kind of narrows the base of support. They don't have the counterbalance. So you are correct. Good. If you opt for the clasped hands, just know that there are some things you can utilize when you're working on, let's say, that forward translation of the trunk. With the clasped hands, you may grab it and just kind of guide them over top of their clasped hands. And when could be in the rotation component, that could be the forward translation. So that's a good position for your patient to be in, for you to facilitate some of that. When would you use approximation? Is there any point you could use approximation in this activity if we break it up into kind of a blocked practice?
Can you remind me what approximation means?
So that's where you're usually applying pressure to the proximal area. So for the upper extremity, it'd be the shoulder area, the scapular area, or for the pelvis, it would be the top of the iliac crest. When would you want to give that downward pressure to facilitate during transfer activities?
When they're trying to stand up?
Okay, so anytime you're trying to facilitate any form of weight bearing, that's when approximation is a really good idea, excuse me. So when would we do that with the shoulder? When are we weight bearing when we're trying to perform a sit to stand transfer?
When you're putting your hands down to push yourself up?
Yeah, so you could have your patient's arm, they're weight bearing on a mat table and they bend the elbow. So it's hard to demonstrate here, but the elbow bends. You're back here facilitating the strength, the straightening and the not so much the bending, but the straightening end of it. And your other hand, as soon as they get to that extension, you're giving that downward pressure for the actual weight bearing. So when you're going to do it in the lower extremity, once the patient gets up to standing, that's when you give the downward iliac pressure to facilitate the weight bearing through that weaker limb in standing. So it's not in the transition, it's when you're having that full extension weight bearing position. So again, for the upper extremity, you're using it in a very block practice fashion. Okay. What would visual feedback do for your patient? How would it help them during a sit to stand transfer practice? What kind of information is it going to give them?
They can see if their weight is evenly distributed.
Perfect. Yes. Good. And they may be able to tell, even if it's an anterior view of reflection of themselves, they may still be able to see if they're not coming forward far enough. They may. And again, a count, a beat, anything like that you can add there to help facilitate. If you were to use a PNF pattern to strengthen, you don't have to use a PNF pattern, but if you did, for the sit to stand, which pattern would you strengthen your patient in for that push to stand? Think about what the foot and the lower extremity are doing to push off.
D1.
And you're going to do the flexion or the extension?
The extension.
Correct. Okay, does that make sense? That push down and out is kind of what they're not necessarily going way out, but it's that same general motion that they're going to utilize. So if you wanted to do something before you had them do the actual transfer, like a preparatory activity, you could be working on D1 extension strengthening. Good. What parts, real briefly, what parts are floor to standing transfer? What has to happen? Your patient's fallen down on the floor. Let's say they're on their back. What has to happen first?
Sit them up to their butt.
Okay, let's assume they're not getting assistance. So what is the patient most likely to do first? They're on their back.
Roll.
Besides maybe call 911.
Roll to where they're side lying and then push themselves up into sitting.
Okay, so roll to side lying. So all of your bed mobility activities, the rolling activities, if your patient doesn't have that good capability, you know that if they were on their own at home and they fell, they're going to need assistance because they're not going to be able to get themselves rolled, right? So that's why you would work on these things when you're with them, to make sure not only can they get out of bed, but if they had a fall, we need to be able to have them get up off the floor if possible. So yes, they're supine on their back. They'd have to roll. Once they get to on their side, what are they most likely to do? They're not quite ready to stand yet. What? Sorry?
Push both hands up. 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 Push both han possibly kneeling,
Okay, how do they get there?
pushing up with their hands into.
You're on track. So they're on their side. They're probably going to push up with their hands, right? And kind of get to a side sitting situation, right? And then if they can, they're going to try to get to quadruped on all fours and then up to kneeling. And they may pull up on a piece of furniture or something stable. But yes, then they get to kneeling. Then they do half kneeling, get one foot on the floor ready to stand, right? And regardless of whether they're pulling on something stable or not, they'll use the half kneeling position to get to standing. So just know that if you need your patient to know how to get up to standing from the floor, all of those postures could be worked on. You could work on bed mobility. You could work on side. We did some stuff that had side sitting to kneeling or side sitting to quadruped. You can work on all of those. Half kneeling, push to standing. Okay. So all these still come into play with a simple, I fell on the floor. All those different levels, all those different treatments apply. So you guys mentioned a couple of things with safety. So gait belt you mentioned. What else when we are doing a transfer with a patient, what else may come into play as far as safety?
What shoes they're wearing?
Okay, proper attire. What else?
Proper body mechanics.
Perfect. Right. There's some more.
Uneven surfaces, like a cluttered area too.
Okay. Clearing any potential safety hazards. Let's say your patient's in a wheelchair. What do you need to think about?
Locks of wheels.
Wheel locks. Good. If they were doing a squat pivot transfer where the fanny's just going to come up enough to get over to the other surface, what else do you need to consider besides the wheel locks?
With the armrest.
Armrest. What about the position of the chair?
It needs to be like angled kind of towards the bed.
Okay, it's on a 45, right? So we have 90 here. I should say that's 90. We're on a 45 with the table. So, and you want that front corner of the wheelchair to be right up against that surface. You don't want a giant gap in between because your patient can get stuck in there. Okay. If there are footrests, what do you need to consider there? Especially the one on the side being transferred to. You could just swing the other one away after you've removed the limb off of it, but definitely the one closest to the table on the 45 would have to be removed. Good. What about a slide board? Is there any safety concerns there?
Has to go under your ischial tuberosity.
It
Don't have
does.
them stick their hands in the holes.
What's that?
Don't have them stick their hands in the holes, like the little
Yeah,
slide
so
holes.
you cue your patient to keep a flat hand, never curl the fingers either on the end or through that hole. You want to keep them a flat hand at all times. Good. All right. And what are your cues when you have a patient do a slide board transfer? What do you not want them to do?
Lean, put the board under their butt, and then bing, and then scoot.
Okay, so it should be lift and scoot, never slide. You don't want your patient sliding down the board. Even though it's called a slide board, you want them to lift, scoot, lift, scoot, lift, scoot. Why?
More controlled.
More control. What does the sliding produce?
Friction.
Friction.
Force.
And if you have a patient who can't feel their bottom, is that a problem?
Yes.
Yeah, they may be creating a wound and they have no idea. So it's always a lift and scoot, no, never a slide. Okay, good. One last thing with transfers that I want to mention. There's something, maybe new verbiage to you, called head-hips relationship. Okay, you guys are going to want to know that one, head-hip relationship. And that may or may not appear in something written. So if you need to write that down, go ahead and do that. So what that means is, if I were to tell you that I want you to shift your hips in your chair, and you guys can do this right now. I want you to take your left hip and scoot it towards the left. Show me what you would do.
Wait, what do you want me to do? You want me to take my left hip and scoot it to the left?
Yep. Okay. Aubrey did it really well. Show us again what you did. Do that one more time.
I don't know.
There, she did it. She did it again. Okay. So did you notice when she shifted, she leaned this way so her hips could go that way, right? That's called the head-hips relationship. So you notice anytime you want somebody's backside, whether it's a squat pivot transfer or a sideboard transfer, what have you, if you need the backside to go one direction, their head should lean a little bit the opposite direction. And that will help you gain the mechanics you need. Okay? That's an important one to remember. Head-hips relationship. Okay, good. Any questions on general thought processes for transfers? Okay. And I'm just going to correlate here real quick. I'm going to share my screen one more time. I got to do this first. I'm on the wrong thing. I just want to show you how it's going to apply to your Thursday lab. Okay. So when it comes to your sit to stand on Thursday, there's not a ton of like picture and description like there has been, but you've done all of this stuff. Okay. So one of the first things is we just talked about placing the foot into position. So it may or may not be an actual PNF pattern. You could do it in a straight plane. So if you need that foot to come back, you've got knee flexion, right, that you need to work on. And this is obviously on the weak limb. So you could do it as a rhythmic initiation activity. You could perform it as a dynamic reversal, combination of isotonics. You could tap the hamstrings to get some knee flexion occurring and cue them verbally to place the foot back. All of those types of things you can work on. You could also, this is more of just an adjunct and not necessarily a treatment itself, but using the unaffected foot. So if my right foot is my weak foot, I'm going to place the left one forward. You know, we were saying we needed both feet underneath us to stand. Well, I'm trying to make my weak one do more work, and it's ready to learn and take on more. So I'm going to place my strong foot forward so it doesn't have the mechanical advantage to do most of the work. Okay, so placing that unaffected foot forward will make the affected limb underneath have to do more of the weight-bearing activity. We talked about pelvic tilt activities with manual cues. We could do it as rhythmic initiation, dynamic reversals, combination of isotonics. You could even have a patient sitting on a ball, a physio ball, and doing pelvic tilt. Okay, all those sorts of things you can do. So again, instead of walking you through each intervention, you should be able to kind of breeze through and apply different ones in that activity, in that function that you're looking for. With pelvic tilt activities, I put in a video here. You may see some terminology called nutation or counter nutation. Nutation is going to be the tilting or the rotation at the pelvis when there's an anterior tilt. Counter nutation is going to happen to the pelvis when there's a posterior pelvic tilt. And yes, if you are like during gait, you're going to have two sides of the pelvis doing different rotation. Okay, so you have to understand the mechanics of that. So I just want to make sure there was something to help you know and understand what that verbiage is referring to. If we go down, there's just a list of a few more things. We talked about the forward trunk momentum or movement. You know, and we didn't really talk today a ton about gaining momentum for the sit to stand in that forward trunk motion, but you could definitely cue your patient to create some momentum as they come forward. But again, rhythmic initiation, stabilizing reversals isn't going to be so much for the movement, but it may be a starting point if you need some stability to be accomplished first. Dynamic reversals, combination of isotonics. Again, you could use the physio ball. Things like facilitating the affected lower extremity while we're going from sit to stand. We talked about approximation. So we talked about approximation at the iliac crest in the lower extremity, but you could also provide downward approximation at the distal thigh to cue those quadriceps to push into extension. That would be very often used. You could tap the quads, again, to get knee extension. You could work on trunk rotation during the transition. They may have to, for like a side scoot, they may have to come forward, but on a diagonal. Again, you could use those clasped upper extremities, give them visual cues for that, and use all of your named interventions as we keep repeating ourselves on. I mentioned sit to stand and stand to sit with timing to gain control. So that's what your concentric eccentric control of the transition is referring to. So again, you could apply a combination of isotonics at the ASISs, press against me coming up, pause. Okay, now slowly lower back down against my pressure, doing the count or the beat. And then, of course, we talked about upper extremity, and its CKC is closed kinetic chain. That's what that stands for. So we're looking at what the upper extremity is doing in closed chain fashion, and that's that upper extremity push-off. So again, we mentioned tapping the triceps. We mentioned approximation at the scapula or the shoulder. Manual cues, we talked about that. In that elbow bending and straightening, you could apply a dynamic reversal for the extension component. You could do the combination of isotonics to the extension component. And of course, protraction is needed for the actual push-off. Okay, so that's how that's going to apply when it comes to transfers and what we just talked about. You should be able to do those, and you can go back to any one of your other lab materials. If you need to see a picture or need to see a description, you can refer back to that. Okay. Questions on transfers?
No.
Okay. Do you guys need a break right now?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll keep rolling then. Wheelchairs is going to be somewhat brief. You guys have had some experience with wheelchairs. You've got the basic, you get your drive wheel, your caster wheels, your wheel locks, your push handles, your armrests. Some are removable, some are not. You talked about the sitting surface. So most of your neuro patients, when it comes to propelling their wheelchair, not much significantly changes other than if you have a stroke patient and let's say their, I'm going to say left upper extremity doesn't work. Obviously, they're not going to use that arm to propel the wheelchair, but not a ton changes with the thought process. They just use what they have remaining, okay? So what you're going to find with all your wheelchair stuff this week, it's going to kind of shift and talk a little bit more about spinal cord, which you haven't gotten to yet, but it's so that you understand and you can start to visualize how different that application can be versus your general thought process of wheelchair propulsion. Okay, so on a typical patient, your hands are at like the 12 o'clock position, top of the drive wheel, right? And they push forward, okay? And they have that forward momentum, and they're just grabbing the wheelchair rims, okay? When it comes to some of your spinal cord patients, they may or may not have the ability to grip, or they may have some ability kind of in a passive form, and we'll talk more about that in week 6. But it changes what you may have on your wheelchair. There may be little rim projections that stick out like little spokes, or they may be much longer because now the patient can just simply push from here and not have to grip it at all, okay? Depending on what musculature they still have innervated in the upper extremity up here, their method for propulsion will look a little bit different, okay? So just understand that element. And then, of course, when we talk about spinal cord here in the near future, the wheelchair itself may look different, okay? Some of the more sport wheelchairs, they don't even have wheel locks on them, okay? So it's just kind of understanding a little bit about that. What I would like you to do, and I'm going to get to this real quick and share my screen. For wheelchairs, what you guys are going to do for class. All right, this first video that you're seeing the link for shows you how to apply a gait belt. to the wheelchair for safety. So what you're going to do with each other, you're going to have a wheelchair, and then down on the underneath the seat, there should be crossbars, okay, where the frame is. You're going to take that gait belt, and just like you would loop it through and use the teeth to put it on a patient, you're going to loop it around the crisscross. So it'll go right over the crisscross here, and then you'll cinch it, okay? And so then you have this nice long strap. And so when your classmate goes to do a pop a wheelie and the chair will posteriorly tilt, you can give counter pressure so they don't fall back and hit their head on the floor. And it's the same thing you would do with the patient to teach them how to do a wheelie when it's really rough looking, okay? And they don't have control over it. So you as a student in the chair are going to place your hands, and it's a very forward, like a, I want to say robust, but it's a very quick movement of the wheel going forward to pop those front casters up. And I want you to work on trying to pop a wheelie. Your classmate is going to have a hold of that gait belt. Now, granted, if you put too much tension on that gait belt, your patient isn't going to get the chair to tip to do the wheelie. So you have to have enough control that you're not pulling on it unless there's an over tip, okay? And then you give counter pressure. So anytime the chair is going to tip, you guys need to have somebody spotting using the gait belt behind the chair. We don't want anybody to fall and get hurt, okay? But popping a wheelie in the room, then I'm going to have you do where you propel the wheelchair through the building, okay? So areas where there's not a class going on, if that's possible. I'm not real familiar with your building. So, you know, Denise can guide you as to where you can go with your wheelchair. But yeah, navigating. So you should open your own door, okay? So whether the door swings in, door swings out, you get used to that. If you're able to take it anywhere outside, awesome. If you're not, that's fine too. If there's anywhere there's a ramp, if you're able to use that, that would be helpful. And then if there's any place that has a curb, again, you need a spotter, but that little bit of wheelie pop will get the front casters up on there, and then you can do a nice firm push to get the drive wheels up to the next surface. So I want you guys to play with that a little bit, but safety is of utmost consideration. So you always have to have a spotter anytime there's going to be any form of tipping. So you guys will have to be a little careful too then if you're going to propel the wheelchair and then you come across the curb and want to do it. I would have the gait belt probably already hooked up, but make sure it's in a safe place so it's not dragging on the ground, doesn't get caught in the wheel kind of thing, okay? That should be a fun activity, but you'll learn a lot about what is required from your patient, okay? So that will be the first thing that you'll do. The rest of the videos here, again, pertain more to spinal cord, but it'll start getting you prepped for potential deficits and what trouble spots the patient may encounter when it comes to operating their manual wheelchair, okay? If you need better visuals of what it looks like to actually pop the wheelie, go up the curb, there's some here for the curb. There's even a spinal cord patient doing a wheelchair to car transfer. And yes, he disassembles his chair by himself and puts it in the car, takes it back out, assembles it, and gets back in it. So that's very helpful to see what's possible. High level activities. There's a patient who goes downstairs in a wheelchair backwards. Okay. They can do that if they are taught well and they have sufficient strength.
We're not practicing that, right?
No. The only thing you guys are practicing is manual propulsion going in and outdoors, a ramp if possible, and a curb if possible. That's it. And you're popping wheelies with safeguarding. Just to get yourselves familiar, there are standing wheelchairs. There's a video on that where it literally, he can kind of crank it and it will get him into a passive standing position, still in the wheelchair. And then a younger guy here at the end showing how he transfers to a chair that goes up the staircase in his home. And it's a little bit lengthy. He gets a little wordy, but it does explain it to you kind of like, okay, well, this is what my real life looks like. So I think that part is helpful. Okay, so that's all you're going to do with the wheelchairs right now. And again, we'll address more with that. The actual wheelchair to mat transfer and back we'll do together at week 6 when I'm there. Okay, so it won't be the last time you'll see wheelchair. Okay, any questions about wheelchairs? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about gait. I'll bring up the document so that you can look at that if you wish to. Back here. Oops, too far. Okay, so this first section here is talking about a few things. So if you weren't reading through the notes, what would have to happen in order for your patient to be prepared for gait, for ambulation? What do they have to have in place?
Appropriate weight bearing status.
Full weight bearing, absolutely. What else?
Adequate range of motion.
Range of motion?
Stability.
What kind of stability?
Lower extremity.
Okay, so lower extremity strength for sure, but where are they going to get a lot of their stability from?
Their core.
Their core and their hip, their pelvis area. So yes, so kind of both have to be in place. So when we're thinking about gait, you're in full standing, right? So the core has to be strong and the lower extremities need to be able to stabilize a weight bearing posture. What else needs to be there?
Their head.
What's that?
Their head.
Their
Like
head,
their
okay.
cognitive status.
Okay, yes, those are all added elements to think about. Yep. So if they're walking, are both feet always on the floor?
No.
No.
No. So what has to take place in order for one foot to get up in the air?
Locomotive rhythm.
Swing.
Yes, but how do I, if I'm standing here, both feet on the floor, how do I get one foot to be able to swing?
Your hip flexors.
I have to
Your
shift
flex-
to one side, right? That's exaggerated because we usually don't walk with a medial lateral sway, but there is a weight shift that has to occur for one limb to be free enough to swing. So a weight shift capability. Okay, so even before your patient ambulates, you may just simply be working on getting from 50-50 weight bearing to 100% so that this one can swing, and then 100% over here so this one can swing. Okay. What about, let's say you're walking on a nice solid surface versus an uneven surface. What kind of control do they have to have? The ability to adapt, right? Reactive, adaptive control. So you may be in standing, you may have been working on things like the ankle strategy, the hip strategy, and then eventually the step strategy. Remember that? We had that cone that limits the stability the guy was in, and then the little old lady had to bend over at the hips to correct her posture, and then she eventually had to take a step. So those are like pre-gait activities. So those have to be in place. The patient has to have that ability to respond to some form of perturbation to that posture. Okay. So what kind of block practice activities could we do with this patient? Okay, let's break something down. I'm going to scroll down on the notes here. Mind you, I do have a note in here that when we get to spinal cord, a lot of these things don't have to be in place for a spinal cord patient to ambulate because they're going to use some form of bracing and or body weight supporting system. And a lot of times it could be done to re-educate muscles that are remaining, or it could also be done for kind of more of an ego purpose of, hey, I stood and I could take a couple steps. Okay, so just know with spinal cord, some of these prerequisites look a little fuzzy. So to prompt the answers to the block practice, let's break apart the gait cycle first. So this should be, I believe, your Ranchos Los Amigos terminology. There's two different types of terms, but we have that initial initial contact when the foot is in descent, right, and makes contact with the floor. Then we load that foot and the plantar flexors start to activate in order to take the load of the body over the foot. Then mid stance, we have extension of everything in the lower extremity, right? We have hip, knee, and ankle extensors opposing gravity to hold our posture. Then as we get towards the end of stance, we're looking to push off with our foot, right? So our trunk continues forward and the plantar flexors continue to push to gain propulsion. Then we start to enter that swing phase. So pre-swing, we're starting to unload and unweight it, and everything starts to get ready to go into flexion. So that initial swing, we get hip, knee, and ankle flexion to advance the leg. That should be dorsiflexion at the ankle. Okay. And then mid-swing, we already start to see some knee extension because of the momentum going forward. And the ankle starts to neutralize its plantar flexion, dorsiflexion in, again, getting you ready to get to that initial contact. So in terminal swing, we have more of a neutral ankle. The hamstrings start to decelerate that momentum of the limb forward, and the quads and dorsiflexors will prepare for that initial contact. So those are how you break apart the gait cycle. Some other things that are about with gait is you have something called cadence. So this is not how fast somebody is walking. This is how many steps are they taking in a minute. So when you guys do talk about Parkinson's, you're going to find that they're going to take these teeny tiny little fast steps, but they're not really getting anywhere. That's high cadence. Okay.
Can we take a break?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I have a question about the, I wonder what's it called?
The head-hip relationship?
No, it's the project. The video we have to do.
The lab practical.
Yeah. So, is there gonna be 2 interventions?
Yes, you'll do a video of an intervention that you'll do like 3 to 5 repetitions with your patient, and that will be to address the goal. Then I want you to do something that advances, makes that activity you did kind of takes it up a notch. What would be the next thing? So if you were working on mobility, you could work on stability, or if you were working on stability, you could work on controlled mobility, or you could just simply add challenge to enhance. So if, let's say, you were working on a strengthening activity, what would you do to add more challenge to that strength? So you can add something that makes the goal you're going after, that you've advanced what your first intervention was, to get closer to the goal. So it will be 2 actual interventions that you'll do 3 to 5 repetitions each.
And with the block practice,
Mm-hmm.
are you just going to be doing like one little segment out of it, or do the whole practice?
So if you were doing, I'm trying to remember what your goal was. I don't want to give you something that went along with. So let's say this is not neuro. My example is not neuro, but I just want to, for the sake of block practice, we're going to use this example. So if I was working on range of motion of elbow flexion with a patient, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I do 3 to 5 reps, and maybe I'm having them learn, okay, this is what we're doing. This is how you would bend and flex your elbow. Okay. I'm going to do 3 to 5 repetitions. This may be to work on their ability to lift something at work eventually is their goal, but I'm just working on the range of motion component right now. That's block practice because I'm not doing the full lifting of the crate that they would have to lift at work. We're just working on one piece of that, which is making sure they have sufficient elbow flexion in order to perform that activity. So that's block practice. If I wasn't doing block practice, I would be doing more of the task and sequence. So any one of those interventions that you guys worked on in lab, where it was rhythmic initiation, or it was combination of isotonics, or it was tapping, or it was this, if you do that and you do it in a specific context working towards your goal and you do 3 to 5 reps, that is block practice. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry about that, Denise.
No, you're fine. One of them had to leave, so I'm thinking, you know
Okay.
what? Instead of somebody missing something, take a little time out here.
That makes sense. That's kind of why I threw out there. Do you guys want to take a break?
Yeah,
Oh,
and then
well.
20 minutes later.
Yeah. Nature calls,
Okay.
right?
Yep. I gotta go see if they're ready to come back yet.
Okay. And I apologize, Ruby Ann. I think when I sent your second email, I think your goal I had worded differently than the first time. So that may have thrown you off as well. I couldn't remember how I wrote the goal the first time. So
It's okay.
you've got everything you need on that. You got the second email you're going with?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
All right, Karen, we're all back.
All righty. Is Michaela coming too? Oh, there she is. She's there. All right, so did everybody catch what cadence is? Any questions about what cadence is?
No. That's
Okay, perfect. So let me go back to my tab here. So you have the time spent in double limb or single limb support. That's another consideration. Sometimes with certain diagnoses, you'll find that people will spend too much time with both limbs in full stance and very little swing. So that may be something you work on. So you may be emphasizing the swing portion of gait. People can have a toe in or toe out. So anteversion, retroversion. And remember, that's a hip, typically a hip thing, not at the lower leg. And it may be something that you work on to correct, and it may be something that you just have to function within. Step length and step width. So your step length is going to be when the heel makes contact with the floor to the next time the other foot makes contact with the floor. So how far apart are these 2 feet when they hit the ground to stance? That's step length. Stride length is going to be when my right foot heel hit to the next time my right heel hits. Okay. So what you may find is it may be asymmetrical from one limb to the other, or you may just have it where there's like no distance between one foot to the other. So again, you can work on, it could be floor markers, an object to step over, something to work on those pieces and parts. And you can even work on step width. Maybe your patient stands with too narrow of a base of support, and there might be a line, a tape line on the floor, and you want them to walk, keeping each foot on either side of that line. They may walk with too wide of a base of support. You're trying to narrow that. So again, you could use visual markers. You could use a timing, like a count or a beat, to facilitate any and all of those. Okay. So that's how you would work on those. And again, velocity, if you use some sort of auditory cue, music, a beat, count, you can work on increasing, because some of the diagnoses, their speed will be way too slow. So again, those are some things you can work on. I'm not going to read through all these, but common gait deviations, you could have a lateral bending. I've got another document we're going to look at here real quick that shows some of these, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time there, but Trendelenburg gait, and you can have an uncompensated and a compensated version of that. A patient could posterior lean. They walk with the upper trunk way, way far back, or they may have too much of a flexion or forward lean of the trunk. And if typically if they have that, you're going to see more hip flexion as well. There may be an inability to flex or extend joints during gait. So obviously those are elements you can work on. An antalgic gait, if anybody's ever had an injury during sports or had something happen where they're just suddenly a joint is sore, you're going to have an antalgic gait. That's a limp. You may find with tone, you have to decrease excessive amounts of flexion or extension in the limb in order to make it more normalized. Again, we talked about how to use reciprocal inhibition, where maybe if, one set of muscles, let's say flexors, want to kick in, I can tap the extensors and help diminish that tone. Or I can use that distal part of the limb to either use a quick stretch or positional sense, or not positional sense, but position to break the tone during that activity. So if you figure somebody who's maybe got extensor tone of the lower extremity and everything's in extension and the foot's plantar flexed, that's why they put an AFO on them to dorsiflex the ankle. And a lot of times then you can unlock more of that tone because they keep the ankle in a dorsiflex position. So those are some things you can work on. If they don't have good heel strike, you could have an activity where they swing and then have to tap the heel on a cone and tap on different objects. Okay, that might be something to do too. Your foot slap, if they have poor dorsiflexion control to lower the foot, you'll see a video example of that. That's what word I was looking for. They may have a varus foot. They walk on the outsides of their feet. So these are all pieces and parts of gait. any one of these that's missing or any one of these that's not functioning correctly, you can do a blocked practice intervention to work on that portion of it. It may be that pelvic rotation we talked about, nutation and counter nutation. If they circumduct the leg, they kind of swing it out and around, okay? Usually they have weak hip flexors. They can't bring the limb forward. Sometimes they'll do it because of excessive plantar flexion and extensor tone. Hip hiking, again, they're going to use their quadratus lumborum because they have hip flexors that are weak. Steppage gait, again, they are trying to clear the foot and the dorsiflexors can't lift the foot up well, or they have some tone and they just kind of bring it way up and then slap the foot down. Scissor gait, there's an example in my other document. And again, any poor trunk or pelvic rotation. And arm swing. Arm swing is a big deal with gait. So if you tried to walk and never swing your arms, it's going to feel awkward. So even if it's minimal, there's a certain amount of arm swing that should accompany the lower extremities. So I'm going to stop sharing that. That is basically the premise. You can pick apart each part of gait and work on, again, whatever you're seeing in your patient that is abnormal, and you can work on that piece. So I'm going to share one last document with you. And this just shows you abnormal gait patterns. All right, so a couple other terms to get familiar with. A Tibetic gait. This is your patient who loses some proprioception, so the awareness in the joints of where the limb is in space. So if you picture a lot of your very elderly patients, you kind of see this, especially at nighttime. If a lot of times their falls are when they're trying to go to the restroom in the middle of the night and the house is dark. They have a very wide base of support. They may watch their feet as they walk. They may slap their feet because why do you think they would slap the feet? Does anybody have a guess on that?
An auditory cue?
They're not so much doing it as an auditory cue, but what do you notice is missing that would be normal for this patient? What have they lost?
Strength in their dorsiflexors?
Okay, they may have very well lost some strength, but in the definition of Tibetic gait, what have they lost?
Proprioception.
Yes. So when your joint receptors don't give you good feedback as to where your limb is in space, a lot of times they will hit the ground harder because that can somehow give them additional input as to where the foot is. Okay, so they'll use a foot slapping technique. Your hemiplegic gait is with your stroke patient. So there's usually one-sided or unilateral weakness or paralysis. They may have extensor tone in the lower extremity, and typically, not always, but typically in the upper extremity, if you see excessive tone, it's usually a flexor tone. So why do you think, when it's under manifestations there, why do you think you would see a reduced step length on the unaffected side? So my strong leg, there's a reduced step length.
Should get off the weaker leg quicker.
Absolutely. Good. Very good. Wonderful. So you would work on the affected limb to be able to take the weight bearing longer, right? To be able to stabilize so that the unaffected leg can step further. Poor pelvic and shoulder girdle rotation, and usually a retracted scapula. So if you can picture the flexor tone, I brought my scapula back. So they're in a retracted position. So sometimes when we're talking about NDT and key points of control, sometimes, yes, we use the distal component, but you might also protract and push that scapula forward to help unravel the tone here. So this just gives you an explanation of what you may see if there's no extensor synergy, no tone, extensor tone in the lower extremity. What you may see is the heel strike leg will get into position, kind of maybe more of a slap. And then they kind of passively, we talked the other day about how you might lock out the knee into extension by shoving the weight posteriorly. That may be more of the strategy you'd see in that patient. If the extensor synergy in the lower extremity is present, you're not going to get heel strike because the toes are, the ankle's in plantar flexion, so the toes are going to hit the floor and the heel's not going to get to the floor. Okay, so I'm going to try to, Denise, let me know if you guys can't see this. I'm going to try to share this quick YouTube. Did that come up?
No, if not, I can bring it up later.
Okay. All right. I will take that down. That's a bummer. But yeah, there are links in all of these so that you can kind of get your eyes on what it looks like. If you notice the picture of this patient, it's not the same patient in the video, but you can see how that whole left side kind of wants to trail. So I don't see necessarily a ton of extensor tone in that left lower extremity, but you can tell that the left upper extremity is not doing much to contribute at this point. If you see a scissor gait, again, we talked the other day, this is more of like your cerebral palsy patient. A lot of effort is used, and this is where the limbs kind of cross over in front of each other. So they come into adduction with hips and knees flexed typically, although it can kind of have a bit of an extensor tone to it. Ambulating on toes, and again, each crosses over midline. So again, there's a YouTube video there for you. If you hear of ataxic gait, this is going to be a little bit more your MS patient, your multiple sclerosis, again, which you have not gotten to in this course, but just getting you familiar with different types of gaits. This is going to be super unsteady, uncoordinated, very, very jerky, kind of a staggering. And a lot of times they'll reel to one side. They kind of give, you know, if you've ever been walking, some of us do this when you're walking, you tend to kind of veer off to one side or the other. This is an extreme, like literally a leaning to that side or the listing to that side. A lot of energy consumed for that. And then you may also hear of a Parkinsonian or a festinating gait. Parkinson's disease is typically where you're going to see this one. A very flexed posture, but a very rigid trunk in that posture. There's not a ton of movement. Again, the short shuffling steps, so high cadence. They don't start the movement or stop the movement well. So when you see festination, what happens is your patient will do this quick stepping, and the trunk kind of gets leaning forward, and the trunk's kind of going faster than the feet are getting excursion across the floor. So they start leaning forward and they can't catch up. Their feet can't catch up with their body. So they are a fall risk in that regard. So that's festination. You may also see a retropulsion, and that's again that posterior leaning, and again would be a fall risk. Hysterical or astasia, abasia. I've seen different versions of this. Again, it can be with different kinds of paralysis, but a lot of times it's a very jerky motion. So we're not going to talk a ton about that, but just know there is a bizarrely uncoordinated gait that looks very distinct from the others. Staggering, you know, if you've had somebody who drank too much in one evening, you know what staggering would look like, or if you've seen that out and about, okay? But it can also be associated with other things neurologically, like brain tumors, MS. So just know if you've seen staggering, it looks distinct from some of these other gaits. And then waddling, if you think of like the pregnant lady, or, you know, in this case, a penguin, you know, they waddle side to side. So hip extension can be weak, increased lumbar lordosis, so the belly sticks out further. So lots of medial lateral movement. Steppage gait is when, again, the weakness, especially the anterior tibialis, so they don't control the dorsiflexion well. And so they bring the limb up and slap that foot down. You know, it's kind of an exaggerated swing in order to get that foot. And again, there's a YouTube. So that's for toe clearing. So you could really work on with that patient activation, if possible. If the dorsiflexors still have innervation, you can work on activating them and work on then the functionality of clearing the toes. A Trendelenburg, again, it's a gluteus medius weakness. Which side is affected in that patient if you're looking at that picture? Is it the left hip or the right hip?
Left.
How many say left? How many say right? And the others don't know. It's actually their right glute med that's weak. So if you look at the picture, they're facing the same direction you are. So the right hip glute med on that lateral side is not able to hold the pelvis in a level horizontal position. So it drops. So if you kind of picture a rubber band on the right side of the hip. What's that?
Her left side is dropped.
Her left side is dropped, but the weakness is on the right side. It's named for the tilt, but the weakness is on the right. So if you picture kind of, if she had a rubber band going from like the lateral thigh up to the top of her pelvis, that's the glute med. As this limb over here swings, this has to maintain tension to keep the pelvis here so the leg can swing. If it doesn't, it does this and it lets go. So it's the right side glute med that's weak. Sorry, I didn't mean to tilt the computer. With a tilt down to the left, okay? And so you'll see sometimes this compensated or uncompensated. So if they were compensating on the right one, that's making them tilt down to the left, what they would do is they'd lean the whole trunk to the right every time they were in stance to try to prevent that left hip from dropping. So that's compensated. Uncompensated would be it doesn't do anything, it's weak, and we just see the tilt to the left every time they walk. So your patient walks and the left hip drops every time they are in stance on the right. Compensated is we're going to do this tilt so that way every time this leg swings, we keep it up level somewhat because we tilt the whole body, the whole trunk over there to do that. Okay. So those are some different gaits you may come into terminology you may come into contact with. And if you know what's weak in them, you know what you can work on. Okay. So let's circle back around to, do you have a question? Oh, I thought I saw somebody's hand. All of that considered, when you have your patient working in blocked practice, can we work on the swing, the step forward and step back? Maybe we have them in the parallel bars, right? We could be working on the dorsiflexion and placing the heel for heel strike. We could be working on the fluidity of the whole limb coming forward. We could be working on strengthening that. We could be working on the pelvic rotation to get that swing, right? We could be working on the timing. Maybe we just need to get it so that the patient's not taking such a quick little step. They're taking a larger, more lengthened step, but we're going to do it to a time, okay? What about weight shifting? What things do you already know you could do to work on the weight shifting to unweight the limb for swing?
Hip hike exercises.
Okay, but if we're going to make it neuro, there needs to be something to facilitate that, okay? But the hip hike would necessarily more be once we've shifted our weight, now we can hike it. So I'm talking about right before that. So how would we get the patient to shift the weight of the body to one limb versus the other, or to, instead of bilateral, they're going to shift to one limb? How could you facilitate that?
Manual cues.
Manual cues. Where would you place a manual cue?
On their hip.
On the pelvis that they're going to go to, right? Could you do approximation on that iliac crest of the limb that you want to take all the weight and shift to? Cue them. Okay, I want you to shift to your left leg, and as you do that, I'm going to apply downward pressure through that left hip. Okay. All right. Anything else you could do? Maybe they've got that down. Now you want to strengthen it to get them to shift better or to coordinate it.
You could do visual cues.
You could. Could you have a mirror in front of them? Can you resist both sides of the pelvis as they come against you to strengthen it? Absolutely. Could you do it as a combination of isotonic? Push against me. Good. Now hold. Okay. Now as we return, do it against my pressure. Okay. You can apply all those things over and over and over again. We talked about foot placement and clearance. So stepping up over a cone, or stepping to a floor marker. You can add the timing. Okay. We talked about a little bit about walking on different surfaces, right? So if their gait is pretty good, walking on a nice solid surface, you may want to have them walk on something more like a mat. How about dual task? What could you add to make it a dual task activity? When you walk down the hallway with your friend or your classmate, do you just look straight ahead and just walk?
No, you could talk to them.
You're talking, your head's turning, you're looking at stuff, you might be gesturing, you might be doing. So any of those will provide dual tasks. So as your patient is walking and doing a walking activity in a blocked practice, we're not talking about walking 300 yards. We're just talking about in a small section. You could add head turns, up and down, side to side. Okay. You could sometimes just simply treat them in a more busy room where there's lots of distraction and they're tempted to look and listen at different things. Sometimes that'll provide dual task. So when it comes to your TBI patient that we talk about next week, they can't handle a lot of distraction at the beginning. A lot of your CVA can't either in that beginning time frame. TBI more so, but sometimes with your stroke as well. They need a quiet, we're going to work on one thing. We have clear instructions. We're going to do this and we're going to do it over and over until you get that down. Okay. So as you're adding distraction, that challenges them. What could you do in mid stance? Let's say they got extensor tone and the limb wants to stay up on their toes. What could you do to try to decrease that tone in stance? Because remember, as soon as that plantar surface of the foot hits the floor, that's what triggers the tone. When it touches and makes contact and takes weight. So maybe they were fine during swing, but as soon as that limb hit the floor, they kind of went into extension.
You can obviously do toe taps.
What was that?
Toe tap.
Toe taps. Okay. So what surface of the foot is going to touch if you do a toe tap?
The ball and toes.
The plantar surface again, right? So we're trying not to trigger that. So what could you think opposite? What could you, we know the foot is already on trying to get on the floor and then the tone kicks in. So what can we, how can we facilitate to get that tone to dampen?
Toe raises.
Okay, so think opposing side. So what's opposite of plantar flexion or plantar flexors? Dorsiflexors. So could you tap dorsiflexors? Could you tap tib anterior? The muscle belly? Yeah. Okay. So there's some things you could be doing in stance to help minimize and get that foot on the floor. Okay. But it may be in certain instances you have to use an AFO to keep the tone broken. Okay. That may be a possibility as well. What about during swing? perhaps too much flexion wants to happen. Too much flexion synergy wants to kick in. The minute you dorsiflex the foot to come up into swing, it all curls up in the lower extremity. If you were going to cue or tap, what would you tap?
Hamstrings.
We have flexor tone. Are hamstrings flexors or extensors?
Flexors.
Flexors. So if we already have the flexors on, we need to turn the extensors on. So what would you tap?
Quads.
The quads. Good. Is that starting to click and make sense?
I think
Okay.
so.
Okay. We already kind of talked about step length and step width using floor markers, tape, those sorts of things. We already talked about manual cues to get anterior pelvic tilt. So when your patient is going to step, let's say they're going to swing with the right leg, okay? If you need to cue the anterior pelvic tilt on that side, you would just manually cue the ASS on that side, right? You don't need it on both because the stance leg needs more extension. The swing leg needs more flexion. So we're going to get that anterior tilt as the flexors engage, okay? So that can be something you can do. How could you facilitate arm swing? And so when you swing your arms, is it same leg or opposite leg that goes?
Opposite.
Opposite. Good. So you as the therapist could be in front or behind, and you can use dowel rods, just 2 sticks, right? So your patient's in front of you. I'm going to use the version where you're behind them. Your hands are on the dowel behind them. Their hands are on the dowel in front of you. And you can facilitate, okay, and I'm going to have you take a step forward with your left foot, and then you're going to push the right arm forward with the dowel, and then keep doing that reciprocal, okay? So you can facilitate arm swing, a dramatic arm swing or a more normal arm swing during stepping activities. And it could just be that you're going to have them step with that left foot and push the right arm. Step with the left foot, right arm at the same time. We're going to do that over and over again. And then you could do it with the opposite. Now you do it with the right foot and the left arm. And then you can put it together. So that's how block practice works. You break it down to the smallest part you need to work on in repetition, and then you add more until you get up to that task or skill level. Okay. How could you correct posture in gait?
Put one hand on the chest, one hand on the posterior spine, and
Yep. You got it. Okay. Could a visual cue, could using the mirror help them make sure their posture is where it needs to be?
yes.
Absolutely. And in the case of Parkinson's, when we talked about that festinating gait where their upper trunk gets forward of their feet, that's as soon as you fix the timing of the lower extremities, that usually rectifies itself. That's not so much, that's a hard thing sometimes for the students to capture as they see the flexed forward trunk and they want to fix the posture. Yes, you do, and you can work on posture, but typically the posture gets more forward and exaggerated forward because of the lack of movement and excursion of the lower extremities. So if you fix that part first, the upper trunk leaning forward usually diminishes, okay? So it's not always just the trunk that needs to be fixed. Sometimes it's what's happening at the lower extremities as well. Do you need trunk rotation in gait?
Yes.
You do. So as you arm swing and then the opposite legs, there's a bit of a trunk rotation going on. So you can work on any activity that facilitates that diagonal or forward trunk momentum for gait, okay? And it could be during gait. So how could you emphasize rotation during gait? And so break it down to block practice. So we're not walking 10 feet across the room. We're just doing like a stepping activity, stepping forward, stepping back. How could you incorporate working on rotation of the trunk?
Picking something up.
Yeah, especially reaching across, right? They can reach for a cone as they step, reach and step. Okay, so you can do those sorts of things. And the fact that they have something to reach for and have a visual and it's facilitating their trunk rotation because they have to get to the object, that makes it neuro. Okay, so it doesn't have to be super, super complicated. Is that helping?
Yes.
Okay, I'm trying to bring it off the page and try to make it make sense to you so that you can apply this stuff without having to think quite so hard about it each time. So the remainder of that GATE document that we started with, talking about the Ranchos Los Amigos, the verbiage, and the components of GATE, there are a few interventions, as in the past, where it's got the pictures from the text, but there aren't as many. So that's why I'm trying to give you a list of things that you know that you can break the task apart, and you can think, okay, hey, if I need trunk rotation and GATE, what does that look like? Well, I could do a stepping activity, reaching for a cone. Perfect, you got it. Okay, so those are the sorts of things that you're going to work on kind of on your own in lab, and then we'll convene towards the end tomorrow, I think at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and we can go over some of the stuff and things that you're not quite clear on, or I may have you demonstrate a few of them, and we can do like we did last time and say, okay, you got the basic premise, but we need to clean up a couple pieces and parts of it, and then we'll do that together. Okay. What questions do you have for me? Any?
I'm sure I'll have plenty tomorrow during the lab.
Okay, perfect. That's totally fine. So I will make sure, once again, I know I'm thinking forward, but for week 5, I'll have stuff published so that you guys can be looking at that ahead of time too, before we get to that. We'll work on next week. It's going to be a little bit asynchronous, but I should be meeting with you both days so we can kind of cover our bases there. And if there are lots of questions, as always, please reach out. We'll get your questions answered, put it that way. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, that's all I have for you. So tomorrow in the AM, you'll do wheelchair, popping wheelies, propulsion, ramps, curbs, whatever you've got, and then work through those transfer activities and your GATE activities. And then we'll meet in the afternoon. All right.
Okay.
All right. I'll see you guys.
Thanks, Karen.
Yep.
She would like say something and it would take my brain a couple seconds to process.
All right.